Hi, welcome to part 2 of our dive into views and Razr templates with an ASP.NET MVC. In the first part of this lesson, we looked at the sort of mechanism for calling templates from within a controller. And for rendering those, we also looked at how templates can use a default layout or a default parent template, if you will, contained in the shared folder. And we looked at how to customize which particular template a controller uses when you call the view method. In this lesson, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of actually working with view template files and actually building code that passes data into those templates and sort of interacts with the controller in interesting ways. Okay, so let's bounce over to Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and delete this index2 method that we started off with last time. That was just to kind of illustrate a point about how the view method looks up templates from a shared folder. Let's go ahead and delete that. And then let's just get ready to make a new controller. So our application, the basic functionality that we want it to contain is that it should, when you go to the main view for our application, it should display a list of cheeses and descriptions of those cheeses just as a list on the screen. And if you go to another page, you should be able to add cheeses and descriptions of those cheeses. All right, so that's the basic functionality we want. If you want to think about this as, you know, a to-do list or something like that, you can think of it that way, but I like cheese, so we're going to make a cheeses application. All right, so we essentially want two different controllers and views. We want, let's say two different views. There are potentially different controllers associated with these, but the one view we want is that we want a display of the cheeses in our application, and then the other view we want is that we want a form in which we can add cheeses. Okay, so let's go ahead and assume that the default view, the index view, will be the list of cheeses. Okay, so in the view here, we already have an index view for this guy, which is my cheese. And so we're going to want to add some functionality in order to make this display a list of cheeses. So the first thing I want to do is not even work within the controller itself. I just want to work within the template and just put in some mock data just to show you how you can work with C# code within a Razr template file. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go up here in this top section where I have at and then a pair of squiggly brackets. I can put this anywhere. I don't have to put this at the top, but you know, the at squiggly brackets can go anywhere within a file. In other words, this is a structure that allows us to delimit C# code. We can put this anywhere within our template file. And I want to just add some mock data. So let's make a list of cheeses. And for now, I'm just going to have each cheese have a name. So I create a new list of cheeses. Okay, and then I'm going to say cheeses dot add cheddar, cheeses dot add Munster, and then Parmesan. Okay, just creating some data so we can work with stuff within our file here. So what I would like to do now is be able to render a list of the cheeses that are in my C# list. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how we can do that. The nice thing about these Razr template files and the syntax is that I can kind of intermingle C# code with HTML in a pretty intuitive way. So I want to create a list of these cheeses. Let me go ahead and create a pair of UL tags. And then within this list, I'm going to have LIs with each cheese name in between. So this is, you know, the kind of format of what I want the code to look like, but I actually want this to pull from the data structure up here as opposed to just being hard-coded within the file. So what I would like to do is I would like to be able to have this list rendered via a loop down below within the UL tags. And I can actually do that pretty easily using Razr syntax. So anytime we want to add some C# code to a Razr file, we precede that with the @ symbol. And a lot of the syntax, or pretty much all of it, is going to be the same as it would be in a C# file. So If I want to do a for each loop to loop over the list of my cheeses, I can do that by just preceding it with an @ symbol. And I can say for each string cheese in cheeses. Okay, and then I can below put a pair of curly brackets, and I'm going to put my LIs within the curly brackets because I want to put one LI for each cheese in the list. Now, rather than just printing out the word cheddar for as many items as are in the list, I want to actually print out the specific cheese that we're looking at. So let me delete that. And I can use this, this iterator variable cheese down here. But in order to use it, I can't just type cheese here, right? So look at this line. If I were to just type cheese, how would the template discriminate between code that was supposed to be there as HTML or code that was supposed to be there as C#? Well, it really can't. So I have to actually precede all C# code with the @ symbol. So if I do that, then the cheese, the word cheese here will be interpreted as an identifier and will refer to the cheese variable in my template. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back. I'm going to save I haven't saved my controller yet. Let's make sure that's saved, and then let's start our server. Mine happened to be started by accident, but that's okay. We'll just restart it. Okay, so here we're waiting for our page to load. I'm going to go up and just preemptively type in /cheese to take me to the cheese controller. And we see that we have a page with the heading that was previously entered in there statically. And then we also have a list generated via the Razr syntax from our template file. Okay, so within the Razr file, we see that we created a list programmatically at the top of the file, and then we looped over that list to generate one LI element for each item in the list. Okay, so you can generally do this for any code within your C# HTML files or your Razr files. It's pretty easy. The thing about this, though, is that it's generally not a good idea to do so. So it's generally not a good idea to create data inside of your template files. That's what should happen on the side of the model and the controller. So I just did this to kind of show you how you might easily work with C# code in the same way that you would in a C# file inside of your Razr templates. But this is something that you generally just don't want to do. For one thing, where would we store the data associated with these cheeses if we wanted them to be there in a sort of persistent long-term fashion, right? What kind of application has data that never changes, that wouldn't be stored in a database or wouldn't be editable by the user, right? That's essentially what this data is. The user can't edit this data and they can't store it in a database. So this, again, is just not a great way to approach doing this, but I did it just to show you how you can work with C# syntax within our views file. Let's take the next step of moving this data and moving this data structure back into the controller, and we'll see how we can pass data from the controller into the view. Okay? So it turns out this is actually pretty easy. I'm gonna just highlight all the code associated with this list, and I'm gonna cut it so that it's in my clipboard. And then I'm gonna go back to the controller that I'm working with here for this view, which is the index controller, and I'm just gonna paste it right there. Okay, so now I'm creating a list within the controller, and I'm adding 3 items to the list. Now I just need the basic mechanism of how do I pass this data into the view. All right, so there are actually multiple ways to do this, and we're going to kind of focus on one. I'll show you the other common way to do it, but we're going to focus on one, which is using this built-in object called viewBag. So viewBag is an object that is associated with controllers and views, and it's how data is passed between them. Okay, so I can say viewBag dot cheeses equals my cheeses list. And then when I add something to the viewBag, and when I call view, the view over here will then be able to look that up and will be able to refer to that cheeses item. Notice how, though, I have a red squiggly underneath my cheeses here. That seems to indicate that Visual Studio thinks there's an error here. Visual Studio is probably right. In order to pull something out of the view bag in the view file, I need to actually explicitly refer to the view bag and say viewbag.cheeses. Okay, so once I do that, that says go into the view bag and look for the thing.cheeses that was put there by the controller, and let's iterate over that thing. All right, so let's restart our application and just see that this works in the same way. All right, and if all works well, we'll refresh this and we'll see the exact same display, the exact same data, even though we've moved the data back out of the view into the controller. All right, there we go. So nothing that remarkable to look at because we still see the same thing as we did before, but we did get the added benefit on the back end of dealing with the data in our controller. Our view is only responsible for displaying data. It's not responsible for creating data, and that's the way it should be, okay? So let's go back and let's look at how we might add the next level of functionality. I'm going to go ahead and stop my server here since we're going to make a bunch of changes. Let's look at how we can add the next level of functionality, which is that I would like to be able to have an ongoing list of cheeses and be able to display those and add those dynamically. Okay, so in order to do that, we want to, well, let's first look at how we might display a form to add a new cheese to our list. Okay, so we're not going to worry about exactly how the cheese will get added, but let's look at the form display. Okay, so there's two pieces to this. One is I need to add a new controller to be able to display the form. So I'm going to make that. I'm going to say that this is add. All right, we're within the cheese controller and we're making an add method to add a cheese. And here I'm going to have this return a form. So I want to return a view, and then we're going to go ahead and work with oh, I forgot my curly bracket there. I was wondering why it was yelling at me. I saw lots of red squiggly lines. I forgot the parentheses. Okay, so we're going to want to then go create a template for a form that can be displayed to add a cheese. All right, so this controller basically is just going to display a form. It's not going to do anything much more than that. Let's go and create that form. I'm going to go over here to the views file within the cheeses folder, or cheese folder rather, and say add new item. And I want to add an MVC view page, since this should be associated with the add action method. I'm going to call it add, and I can use the default behaviors there. And then I'm going to delete this boilerplate stuff here. And just as before, I want to sort of discard the default layout. So I'm going to say layout equals null. And then I want to go down here and create a form for a user to enter a cheese. So let me make a form with an input. Name equals name of the cheese. And we'll add a description field later, but let's just do name for now. And then I want input type equals submit. Value equals add cheese. And up here, I forgot to specify the type for my text input. Let's specify that this is type equals text. So this will render a basic form. Let's go ahead and add a title to our page, which is add cheese. All right. And then let's go ahead and see how this works. Fire up your web server. Okay, so let's go to navigate to /cheese/add and see if our form's displayed. And indeed it is. There we go. So we have a nice form which we can add cheese at. There's still a lot to hook up here though. So a couple of things. One is that we need a place to submit this form to, right? Additionally, it would be nice if we had a place on this list where we could click and go to the add form. So let's do the first of those tasks to introduce a new concept. So I want from my index template right here at /cheese, I want to be able to click on a link that sends me to the add form. So let's go to the index template, and up here I'm going to add a p tag, and within that an href. And well, actually, let me leave off the href here. So basically what I want to do is I want to add a link. So I want to add an a tag, and the link will go to the place where we can add cheese. Okay. Now you could just go in here and actually add an href, like as I started to do. You could say that we want to go to /cheese/add, right? In fact, that is the actual path at which we're going to go to add a cheese using the form we just created. However, there's a slightly better way to do this within the .NET, ASP.NET world. Okay, so let me delete this and let me show you this slightly better way. Okay, I can actually use functionality that allows for dynamic link creation. So I can use these special attributes. I can use ASP controller and specify which controller I want this link to go to, and I want it to go to the cheese controller. And I can say ASP-action and provide it with the name of the action method that I want that link to go to as well. And rather than using href, this will then dynamically generate the path that is associated with that action method within that controller, and render that in the template. Okay, and that might seem sort of like a minor thing. It might not seem that important, but in this case, it actually gives us the added benefit of ease of refactoring. So if we were to go back and change our path structure within our application, say discard the default routing mechanism and the default routing structure and add a new one, this link would still render properly. Okay, so this link isn't tied to that assumption of always using the default routing structure. Okay, so that's one piece. This link will then render properly. The next piece is that when I submit something from this form, I want it to then go somewhere and be handled accordingly. So let's make a couple of changes to this form so that can be the case. One is I want to make this a post. Okay, so when you're submitting data that's going to change the state of your application, you generally should use the post method. And let's see that, let's just go ahead and save that, and let's go back to our cheese controller to see how we might add the functionality to then handle that form submission. All right, so I'm back here in my controller now. I want to add a controller method that will handle the form submission and will let the user add a new cheese to their list. So let's create a new action method. And I'm going to say, let me call this new cheese. Okay, so this one's going to use a lot of the concepts we've learned, more so than these methods above. A lot of the new concepts we've learned about how to customize parameter handling and routing. Okay, so our add method, our add form, submits something with a name parameter, which is the name of the cheese. Okay, so I can go ahead and add that to the signature of my controller method and say that we expect to get a parameter from the user called name, and that's going to be a type string. Okay, now what do I do in response to this? I want to be able to basically add the new cheese to my existing cheeses. However, the concept of existing cheeses or previous cheeses doesn't really exist yet, okay? So far, the cheese list that we have demonstrated just for demo purposes lives up here. It only lives within the index method. All right, so let's do something to kind of, eventually we'll be working with data that's stored in a database, and we'll be working with models. We don't have those concepts yet, so let's just give ourselves a way to work with data in a somewhat persistent manner within our specific controller. Let me go up to the top of the controller above the index method, and let me add a new list, and I'm going to call this cheeses. It's going to be a list of strings. And I'm going to say that this is static and private. Okay, so again, we haven't. We're going to dive into the details of object-oriented concepts in C# and what static means explicitly, what private means explicitly. For now, here's the conceptual model that you should hold in your brain. Static means that this particular property is available to any code within my class. Okay, so it's available to any code within my class, and it doesn't belong to any one instance of the class. In other words, I'll be able to call up this list of cheeses from anywhere within my cheese controller. Okay, and this just creates a new empty list. All right, so here, instead of rendering the list of cheeses from some stuff here, let me go ahead and abandon this. And then now the view bag will just post a list of cheeses from the class. So all I have to do is change the capitalization here. I changed the capitalization here because there are different conventions for using, for whether or not you capitalize things. An instance variable or a property of a class is capitalized, whereas a local variable is not capitalized. So that's why I had to change the local variable from lowercase to uppercase. Okay, so now this will look up the cheeses that belongs to the controller, and we'll pass that list of cheeses back to the view, and we'll be able to access the list of cheeses that belongs to the controller and other controller methods. Okay, so let's go back down here to new cheese. All of that work to give us a list of cheeses that belongs to the controller that we can use across different controller action methods. All right, so have a red squiggly there because I'm not returning anything yet. I promised to return an action result. I haven't returned anything. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that by saying that we want to return a view. We'll make that template in a minute, or maybe we'll do a redirect. We'll see. But just to make the compiler happy for now. And so I've just got a situation here where I'm at the beginning of my controller and I've just received a new cheese and I want to add it to my list. So what I can do is I can refer to the cheeses that's part of my controller class, and I can add the cheese to that list. Okay. So this will look up the cheeses list that was established up here as an empty list to start, and it will then add a new cheese to that list. Okay. Now, I said maybe we'll come down and refactor this and have it do something other than display a view. If we're creating a new, or if we're adding a new cheese to our list, what's the most logical place for the user to go? Well, it's probably to the list of all of their cheeses, right? And that's already established by this controller up here. The index controller presents a list of all the cheeses. So we don't need to create a new template or any new functionality here. Rather than just rendering a new template, let's go ahead and redirect to /cheese. Okay, so redirecting to /cheese will, and I left off a quote mark. Redirecting to /cheese will send the user back up to make a request that's handled by this controller, which then displays all cheeses. All right, let's go ahead and stop and restart our server, and let's see what happens. So we should expect a couple of things to happen here. Let's close this tab that's trying to load. When I go ahead and load this path, we should expect a couple of things to happen. One is that that new link to the add cheese page is going to display and be properly formatted dynamically using the new ASP attributes we just learned about creating links programmatically. And secondly, we expect that this list of cheeses is going to disappear, right? We got rid of that static hard-coded list of cheeses in favor of one that belongs to the controller that can then be added to over time through form submission. All right, so we expect this list will disappear and we'll get a new link. Let's see what happens. All right, so far so good. Let's try out our link. Click on Add Cheese, and there we go. We go to the Add Cheese form. Let's go back. All right, so it would be nice here. I want to introduce one new concept through a user story. It would be nice here if, when there weren't any cheeses in the list, I got a message saying as much, right? So let's go back to our controller and see how we can display such a message within our controller. Or well, sorry, within our view. I'm in the index view. I'm in the index template for my cheese controller here. And I want to add the functionality that if there are no cheeses in the list, that I display a message. So I can use, in the same way that I used @ to precede a for each, which looks just like a C# for each, in fact is a C# for each, I can use @ to precede an if statement. Okay, so let me do that and just add that right here. So what I want to say here is I want to say if there were no cheeses in the list that was passed to me, let's display a message. That list that was passed to me is the same one that I'm iterating over down here. So let me go ahead and copy that code and say if view bag.cheeses/count equals 0. All right, so count, recall, count is the property of a list that tells you how many items are in the list. And then here, I just want to put a message that says no cheeses yet. Okay, let's go ahead and try that out. Again, I don't have to restart my server because I'm just changing the view and not the controller. All right, so we see there that we can use conditional statements within our Razr templates in a similar way to loops. And again, if I was going to reference a property or a variable within the if statement, I would have to precede it with an @ symbol, just like I did down here within my for each. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at adding cheese to our list. We should already have that functionality here. We should have a new cheese method that accepts a name of a cheese and adds it to the list. There's one piece that we're missing though, which is that our form, our add form, doesn't have an action attribute, right? So the form itself, in lieu of an action attribute, will post that data to the same URL at which the form lives. So we can use our routing customization to make this true. Let's make this, let's add a customization so that this form lives at the /cheese/add route. Okay, and we furthermore want to specify that this guy handles HTTP post requests. Okay, so now the new cheese method, the new cheese action, will accept post requests to this URL, which is exactly the URL that our form is set up to post to. So since I changed the controller here, I got to restart my server. Let's do that. And stop and start. And hopefully, if we are lucky, if we didn't make any mistakes, our application will be done. Okay, so let's see, we refreshed here. Nothing should change on this particular screen. Okay, let's click on the Add Cheese link. We go to the form. Now we type in the name of a new cheese, we hit submit. Ah, that's pretty magical, right? We made a lot of changes. They happen to work. Whew, that doesn't happen that often. Let's go ahead another one just to see what happens here. Let's add a Parmesan. There we go. So let's kind of recap what's happening in each step of the way and review all of the changes we just made. Okay, so we're at /cheese. This calls the index controller of our index method of our cheese controller, which will pass a list of all cheeses that we've stored to date to our view. That view will then display a link to the add cheese page. It will display a list of all the cheeses added so far. If there are no cheeses, it says no cheeses yet. If we go to the add cheese form, that's a simple form. Put in our add template, our add.cshtml. This form will post to the new cheese controller. Okay, so if we go back here, or so the new cheese action within the cheese controller, the new cheese action is configured to live at the same route as the form. This way we can have the form and the action live at the same URL, but each one handles a different type of request. The form handles a GET request. This new cheese action handles a POST request. When we post to /cheese/add, we are sent to this controller method. This controller method grabs the parameter out of the request, adds it to the list of cheeses that is owned by our controller class, and then it redirects to the cheese controller homepage at /cheese, which will then display a list of all the cheeses we've added to date. Okay, pretty slick. So there we've exercised even, not a ton of code, but we've exercised a lot of new concepts. There's a lot of new concepts packed into this lesson, and I hope you all learned them well. I'm going to give you some exercises to extend and add to this particular example to try out and practice your knowledge of views and controllers to date. All right, so good luck with all of those, and happy coding.